Hello, my name is Margaret Gobble, and this is my presentation on the modern attempt to save endangered species. Animal extinction is a devastating and, as of today, irreversible process. National Geographic defines extinctions happen when a species dies out from a cataclysmic event, evolutionary problems, or human interface. Quote, animals are invaluable in keeping our planet diverse and healthy, and extinctions are happening more and more rapidly with the spread of human influences on the environment. Today, quote, a rapid rate of 1,000 to 10,000 times the baseline extinction rate of 1 to 5 species per year, the National Geographic. Many political movements have been passed in the United States attempting to rectify these issues, starting with the Lancy Act of 1900s, which made hunting and trade illegal for certain animals and species. Throughout the century, a number of laws followed it, leading up to the Endangered Species Act, which helped with keeping track of endangered species, protecting habitats, and preventing selling and trading of them. This act was largely influenced by the endangerment of the bald eagle, which is an important symbol for America. These efforts are necessary, but habitat loss and environmental pollution are increasingly endangering animals without any easy solutions. Scientists explore and debate amongst many methods on how to prevent and heal the rise of endangered animals. I looked into 3 studies from 2009, 2012, and 2019 on experimental methods to study and save endangered animals. Each shares ideas of how we can implement this research into today's operations and suggests ways of improving these methods in the future. Animal populations are incredibly important to our environments and cultures. As mentioned before, many animals have deep historical and cultural ties. Each extinct animal is a loss that can never be rectified, hence why studies like these are so innumerously important. The possibilities for science are as boundless as one's imagination. One of the most popular ideas to entertain is bringing back extinct animals. While this brings up a debate of how far science should go in first birth of an animal from extinct subspecies by cloning, they explore the potential for these studies and how it could save endangered animals. The study is centralized around the Spanish ibex, an endangered animal with 2 extinct subspecies. There are numerous efforts that have been done to save the ibex using natural methods such as food supply strategies, but each one has been unsuccessful in slowing the decline of this animal, and it seems that cloning is now its last hope. The study reconstructed embryos by fusing ibex cells with those of a domestic goat. 30 goats were used, and they were activated embryos and reconstructed embryos. Activated embryos were the control variable. They transferred these embryos to either a pure Spanish ibex or a mixed Spanish ibex, which were their independent and dependent variables. They had 2 trials, one yielded no pregnancies, but in trial 2, 47% of the embryos made it beyond the 2-cell stage, and 12% of those were confirmed pregnant. Many of those pregnancies didn't make it past 75 days, except for one female. She was born healthy except for severe respiratory distress and died minutes after birth. The newborn ibex showed that she was identical to her domestic goat donor, and that a certain injection after remorse DNA improved the results. They also found that only domestic goat embryos transferred directly to a Spanish ibex uterus had pregnancies. They studied the infant mortality and determined that it possibly was, quote, a lack of synchronization between the philosophical stage of the embryo and the recipient uterus, as there are scarce information about the characteristics of the sexual cycle of a Spanish ibex, Fulch, etc., 1032. In short, the article was a bit biased towards the success of the birth they had, though they did admit that the process still has a long ways to go and it's too complex and has so many variables that it can't be successful in helping endangered species as of that time. The study was released in 2009. As of 2018, technologies using gene editing are working to revive extinct passenger pigeons. Ben Novak is responsible for a flock of pigeons that is now carrying DNA that allows scientists to edit their offspring with DNA from an extinct passenger pigeon. In the article, Meet the Scientists Bringing Back Extinct Species from the Dead by Amy Doxter Marcus, she interviews Ben Novak, who talks about the benefits of reviving extinct species, claiming that it is our responsibility to revive them when it was our fault that they went extinct. Another scientist in the article argues differently. Beth Shapiro points out that there is no point in reviving extinct species. She explains that the reason these animals went extinct aren't fixed, so bringing them back would ultimately lead them back to extinction. They explain that the passenger pigeon, quote, the species thrived in years before European settlements of North America. When vast forests supported billions of birds, these forests have since been replaced by cities and farmlands. The habitat of the passenger pigeons that needed to survive is also extinct. Marcus. This method also calls into question if it really counts as de-extinction, since it isn't the same process of cloning, but rather making a genetic copy. This doesn't mean that the animals will have the same behaviors or nature of the original species. So is it worth it? The technology still has a long ways to go before it's perfect. While it does have potential in saving declining species such as the Spanish ibex, or even functionally extinct animals like the white rhinos, the process is yet to be fully developed. The disadvantage at this moment outweigh the potential benefits. Reviving endangered species is a tricky process. There are a lot of factors that go into it since environments are endlessly complex. In Resurrecting Extinct Salmon Evolutionary Significant Unit, Archival Scales, Historical DNA, and Implications for Restoration, Eric Iwanimo, they discuss how evolutionary significant units, ESUs, can be used in studies to protect and research endangered salmon. ESUs are invaluable in understanding species and their population changes. It can achieve a lot of things, such as choosing candidates to reintroduce into a species. They've also been used to look into the integrity of contemporary populations and to see how hatcheries and supportive breeding in fish affect them, or to measure the effects of translocation or estimate population size, or the historical fish population structures, or to detect how selective breeding and genetics has affected fish. There are boundless uses for these ESUs. In this experiment, they study many different salmon populations and compare them to historical salmon scales. Their goal was to collect data that could be used to reintroduce salmon to other locations and hopefully to help stem the rapid population decline. Their results led to learning about previous population bottlenecks, referring to drastic population changes and decline due to loss of genetic variation, which is also being experienced today. They predict that hatcheries, quote, by an aggregate of diverse locally adapted spawning populations are thought to offset environmentally induced abundance variations in individual populations and act to sustain overall basin-wide productivity. Iwanimo 1578. While the results found were informative, it's still a long ways off from helping locate source populations for salmon reintroduction. They state that to select donor populations for salmon, they will have to rely on information outside of their genetics. But their studies has been highly insightful in other areas of the fish populations. While unsuccessful for salmon, they do discuss how ESUs have been successful for reintroduction of animals such as wolverines in California or mockingbirds in the Galapagos Islands. Another great example of reintroduction is wolves in Yellowstone. Yellowstone National Park's ecosystem had been suffering, and the simple trick of reintroducing wolves changed everything. Quote, now the elk are not eating the trees on the ground. Beavers have become more common in Yellowstone. The beavers create more ponds, which provide habitats for streamlined trees, which creates more habitats for nesting birds, and so on. The ecologists call this a trophic cascade, where one organism can create a cascading effect in a complex ecosystem. Yet these effects aren't always favored by the public. Especially in the case of bringing back wolves, there were widespread protests. Ranchers took the stance claiming that they had worked to minimize wolf populations and that they pose a threat to their business. The government doesn't compensate for livestock lost because of the wolves. Hence, it is an economical loss. So is it worth it? ESUs have potential for a lot of animal groups. It is most beneficial for animal populations facing lack of genetic variation and seeking ways to fix that. However, reintroduction, much like de-extinction, is only successful if the reason for the decline in the animal populations are fixed. For example, the article was released in 2012 and mentioned the successful reintroduction of wolverines to California. According to a 2021 article put out by the California Aggie, there's only one known wolverine left in California today. I believe this method is invaluable, and the research into it can prove beneficial for future studies and the possibilities for saving endangered animal populations. But like de-extinction, it still has a ways off to go. There are many fantastical ideas of how we can save endangered animal populations, but sometimes it's the simpler solutions that are most effective. In Saving Endangered Animals Using Adaptive Management by Robert Soria, they prove benefits of adaptive management. Adaptive management is defined as being, quote, predicted on creating lasting partnerships between scientists and resource managers to test alternative hypotheses for contrasting policies. Soria 1. Soria gives an in-depth description of how adaptive management works. They describe that it is a placeholder technique, and it will increase endangered animal populations, but it won't fix the problem. Full habitat restoration is the only long-term solution to save endangered species, but adaptive management is a valuable tool to create time for the scientists to do this. They experiment using caribou. They tested on 8 different caribou populations using management strategies like maternity penning, predator removal, and translocation. They found that translocation was a bust as it introduced new predators to the caribou, and they tended to decline faster than they were in other locations. The best results came from intensive treatments and using a combination of methods. The most effective was using maternity penning, which protected caribou mothers and children until they were strong enough to defend themselves in the wild, and predator removal, which lessened the threats for adult caribou. They found out that if these two things were done, it gave an incredible result, almost doubling the population size. They do bring up arguments against predator removal. In this case, wolves are the main predator of Canadian caribou, which is where the study took place. Wolf populations are endangered in America, but the article points out that there is an abundance in Canada, so therefore their removal of them wasn't harmful. However, as it was seen in Yellowstone National Park, it is a tricky balance to be upheld. Without enough predators, the environment can suffer from overgrazing, which leads to things like loss of vegetation and natural barriers. There's a danger in trying to contort population sizes. However, it seems that of the few temporary solutions that can be used today, it is the most successful. It does require constant attention and treatments that can't really be minimized until habitat restoration begins. And they stress that it is a short-term solution. It seems that the only way to truly save and protect our endangered animals is to give them back the habitats they need to survive. So is it worth it? Adaptive management is a method that can be used today and produce quick results. There's no doubt of its usefulness in buying time in the war against extinction. While it's difficult to say that it won't have negative repercussions, ultimately doing nothing certainly will. What endangered animals need is a restoration of environments that they were meant to thrive in. But sadly, it seems that with each day, we're moving further and further past the point of no return. In conclusion, saving endangered animals is a tricky process. There is no easy one way to attempt helping our animal populations. Each method has its trials and setbacks. One could work perfectly for one type of animal, but have no effect on a different one. Environments are sensitive, and any efforts we make to reverse endangerment can have intense repercussions. Studying and getting to know our habitats is the most important thing, and preventing further harm and possible endangerment. But the animal populations that are suffering today, possibilities of using de-extinction, studies of ESU and reintroduction, and adaptive management, it might be their last hope for survival. Thank you. And these are my citations.